Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome. I will start the program. So first of all, welcome everyone here in the room and also on Zoom via the live stream. Thank you for joining us for Reframing Nature, Tracing Shifting Ecologies Through Art. Anyone who is familiar with the work of our first speaker, Estelle Zhong Mengual, will immediately notice something a little bit off about the title for this evening, Reframing Nature. The term nature, it reduces the living world to one homogeneous thing, separate from us humans, who often think we are not only separate from but superior to nature. The term Zhong Mengual uses in her book is le vivant, or the living in English, which signifies a rich and complicated realm that we are a part of. This shift in perspective is central in Zhong Mengual's book, Apprendre à voir, where she argues beautifully for the role that art can play in shifting our gaze to see the complex character and history of the world of the living and our own lives embedded in it. Art history and natural history come together in her work as the art of looking at the living world from an immersed position. We have 3 speakers tonight who will each tell us something about their interrelated research and practice on where art and ecology collide. Estelle Zhong Mengual will start off the evening with a lecture titled The Ecological Crisis as a Crisis of Sensitivity to the Living World, based on her research of the book Apprendre à voir, which translates in English to Learning to See or Learning to Look, and has been translated to Leren kijken in Dutch, published by Octavo with the support of Institut Français. Estelle Zhong Mengual is an art historian. She received her doctorate from Sciences Po in Paris, where she taught at the Masters in Art and Politics, founded by Bruno Latour, for 6 years. She is now in charge of a chair at the National School of Fine Arts in Paris, titled Inhabiting the Landscape. Her research regards our perception of the living world, past and present. In particular, she works on the development of an art history based on humanities and environmental and natural sciences. In 2023, she co-created with choreographer Jérôme Bel a piece titled Non-Human Dances, which premiered at the Louvre Museum. And this year, she is co-creating a new theatre piece, also with Jérôme Bel, called Recommencer ce monde, with Jolente de Keersmaker, which will premiere in France next week. She is the author of several books, among which Leren kijken. Then Julia Kantelberg will follow, who will tell us something about her practice as an art curator in her lecture titled Being Attentive to the Living World in the Rijksmuseum. Julia Kantelberg is a junior curator at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Her research examines how art both reflects and influences human perspectives on nature. The next and final talk, Museums in the Age of Ecology, Where Next, will be by Colin Sterling, an assistant professor and senior lecturer in heritage, museums, and the environment at the University of Amsterdam, where he teaches across heritage and memory, museum studies, and artistic research. Colin's research critically examines heritage and museums through the lens of art and ecology. He is the author of Heritage, Photography and the Effective Past, and co-editor of Deterritorializing the Future, Heritage in, of, and after the Anthropocene. And he is co-editor of the journal Museums and Social Issues. After the lectures, there'll be a panel discussion with our 3 speakers, and at the end we will also take questions from the audience. And after the program, there will be drinks available over there. And there will also be the opportunity to buy the Dutch translation of Estelle Zhong Mengual's Apprendre à voir, Leren kijken, over there in the back. Now, please join me in welcoming Estelle Zhong Mengual.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Estelle. I'm really, really honored to be here today. It's my first time speaking in the Netherlands, and I'm totally in disbelief that I'm actually presenting my book here in a foreign country, which is like mind-blowing. So thank you so much for being here, really. Thank you to SPO25. Thank you to Octavio. Thank you for, so many names. I'm sorry if I don't say it all. Also, I have to apologize because my English is not perfect. So sometimes I'm going to search for words probably, but I'll do my best. So since it's the first time I'm speaking here, I thought maybe it's a good thing to introduce me a little bit so you will know from where I'm speaking in a way. So as Jacinta said, I'm an art historian. And at some point in my life, like, 7 years ago, something, like so many of us, I assume I was really struck by the ecological crisis as the living condition, the existential condition we are living in now. And mostly the aspect of the ecological crisis that really struck me was because there are so many aspects to it, of course, but the main aspect was the biodiversity crisis, as it is called, the loss of living environments. And I was really, emotionally affected by it. But I didn't know what to do about it. I felt really helpless and really useless because I was an art historian. So I was thinking I'm in the worst field ever to do something about it. I should be a biologist, an ecology, scientific ecology researcher. I should, be an activist or something. But so I struggled a bit to find what I could do from what I've been taught to do best in life, and at some point I read a book by a French philosopher who is called Baptiste Morisot, who has also been translated at Octavo, and one of his books is called Ways of Being Alive. It's been translated in English also, and it's going to be translated in Dutch next year. So in this introduction, he describes the ecological crisis as being also a crisis of sensitivity to the living world. So I must address for some minutes what it means exactly. So he's saying that, of course, the ecological crisis is first and foremost a crisis of the living world itself. Loss of biodiversity, acidification of oceans, deforestation. So it's a crisis of the living, but it's also a crisis of our relationships with the living world. And among these relationships, of course, we think of like political relationships. We have production relationships, socio-economical relationships to the living world. But he's saying that there is a kind of relationship that is often not so seen or so like taken in charge, and which is the crisis of our sensitivity to the living world. And what does it mean exactly by crisis of sensitivity? It's the idea that the palette, the range of experiences, emotions, perceptions, representations, imaginaries we have towards the living world are not as rich, not as wide, not as diverse as the kind of sensitivity we have developed towards other entities of the world. And so it's also the idea is that is also affecting, it has contributed to the crisis we're in also. So just a quick example I don't know if this example works in the Netherlands, but you're going to tell me right now, because I tried this example in Canada and it was a disaster. So you'll tell me. So, for example, if I ask you to think about trains, I hope train is a thing in the Netherlands. It's a cultural object. It's very much a cultural object in France. So if you think about trains, you have like a myriad of representations and experiences and images that come to your mind. It might be the Trans-Siberian. It might be the train you took to see your grandparents in the countryside. It might be the trains that deported people during the Second World War. It might be, I don't know, the faces of soldiers behind windows before going to the front. It might be like endless goodbyes on the platform. So we have, and I could continue this list for like a few minutes probably. But now if I ask you to think about a roe deer, which is a very common animal, even in the Netherlands. You have plenty of it in the countryside. And it's been living in Europe with us humans for 400,000 years, contrary to the train, who's been living with us for 300 years or so. I assume, and I don't know you, maybe I'm assuming wrong, but I'm assuming that the images, the experiences, the representation, the emotions that are like coming through your mind right now are less. They're less numerous. They're less complex. They're less diverse than all that came to your mind when I spoke about trains. So that's a very simple example of what I mean about crisis, just about the ecological crisis as a crisis of sensitivity to the living world. And of course, when I came across this concept, I was very much relieved because I thought, okay, as an art historian, now I can do something because sensitivity is kind of what we do. I mean, what artists help building and shaping, and hopefully what art historians help conveying to the world also. So basically my book, Apprendre à voir, leren kijken, is really about trying to understand both two aspects, which is first the sensitivity to the living world we have inherited from modernity, basically from Western modernity, how unconsciously or consciously we've learned to see and to consider and to value or not value the living world. So that's the first part. It's the critical part, if you want to put it like this. And then there is a second side to my research, which is trying to find within our Western heritage, our Western pictorial heritage, because this is what I do, paintings, artworks that are conveying what I feel is a richer perception of the living world that could help us for today, for the problems we're facing today, that could help us to build more complex, more richer relationships to the living world. And yes, I think that's the main thing I wanted to say to introduce myself and the book. So, of course, I only have 15 minutes. It's already, 6 minutes have already passed. So I can't go through everything, but mainly the how do you say that? The diagnostic, is this a word? Diagnose? Like the what I found, like the starting point of leren kijken, is that I looked very broadly across the history of Western landscape painting, and I have to say that what I'm saying does not apply to Dutch landscape painting. Dutch landscape painting is a thing in itself. We can talk about this later if you want in the conversation, but in Italian landscape painting, French landscape painting, English landscape painting, and American landscape painting, in this tradition, what I found is a very particular phenomenon, because nature is very much represented. Also, I was working on landscape painting, and in landscape painting, nature is supposed to be the main subject. But the paradox I found is that most of the time, and I'm of course emphasizing it a bit, nature is not present. There is kind of an absence of nature in the sense that most of the time animals and plants and environments are present for something else than themselves. They're present to embody human meanings, human stories, human emotional projections. So, for example, and it's something that artists did, but it's also something that art historians pushed through the 3 centuries, because it's what we've been taught to do also, to look for hidden symbolical, metaphorical meanings. So it's as if when, I don't know, an oak or a chaffinch is represented on a canvas, we feel its presence is justified if it's carrying a human meaning attached to it. Like, for example, the chaffinch would be like the prefiguration of the Passion of the Christ. An oak, probably something about strength and like resistance, but attached to a human story. So it's what I want to say by like there is an absence of the living world, is that most of the time there is this idea that we're interested in the living world when it speaks about us humans. And there is kind of a feeling that there is a doubt that if we don't project or add human meanings to the living world, to animals and plants, there is kind of a lingering doubt that they would have meaning, and meaning interesting enough to be represented and transmit to humans, if we don't add a layer of human meaning on it. So that's the starting point of the book. And so, yeah, to summarize it, it's as if there is like kind of a difficulty in our Western cultural tradition to make room for the alterity, for the otherness of the living world, as if we're only interested in reflections of us. We're seeing us everywhere. It's really weird. So I was interested, so I started to explore landscape painting, not knowing really what to do, because I knew like the anti-figures in a way, which is, for example, being a symbol, being a metaphor, being a mirror for emotional human emotions, or being a background, which is also a thing. But I didn't know what to look for, precisely because I'm also an inheritor of the Western cultural eye. So I've also had, and I'm still doing it, and I'm not done at all, but I'm still trying to, learning to see it's not like an injunction towards the public, it's really like an injunction towards me, yeah, you should do better. So, what does it look like? I won't have really much time to do a full demonstration, but it's kind of an aperitif. Maybe this word exists in Dutch. Yeah, good. Okay, so it's kind of just to give you an idea of what you can find in the book. So I've been, so no, it's going really, really quickly. I don't want it, yeah. So I've been looking at this painting by Albert Bichstadt, who is an American painter from the Hudson River School. And it's a very grandiose landscape painting depicting a storm arriving in a mountain landscape. There are many, many things to see. Probably there are 35 pages dedicated to this painting in the book, because I'm trying to analyze how everything unfolds in this painting. But for the 4 minutes I have left, I just gonna focus on one very small detail, which is this bird of prey, which had been the entry point for me in the painting for learning to see it in another way. So when you read analysis from these paintings by art historians, you will find most of the time that this bird of prey is a symbol, and you probably can figure which symbol is it. The idea is it's probably a bald eagle, like the symbol of the United States that you can find on the seal of the United States and on many institutions. And because the Hudson River School was in the 19th century, at the time where the United States was creating itself as a nation, so the idea is that this is like the rise, this bird of prey is here to symbolize the rise of the nation of the United States. So my idea is not to say this is not true. My idea is to say maybe there is more to say about it than this. So it's kind of like telling me as an art historian, you shouldn't stop when you find a symbolical meaning. You find other things to say maybe, and things that don't like just go towards humans, maybe towards the outside, the others. So what's really interesting in this bird of prey, if you start to look at it, is the first argument. You're probably not going to be convinced by it, but I have many more, so bear with me. The first argument is like when you show this depiction to ornithologists, they're saying, no, it can't be a bald eagle. And you're going to say, okay, but like a painter can do whatever he wants, like if he wants to paint it like this. But you have to know that Albert Bierstadt was like, as you can see, was a very knowledgeable painter in natural history. He read a lot of natural history. He was always outside, sketching outside, and he really depicts carefully plants and animals. So if he really wanted it to be a bald eagle, there would be many ways for him to make sure that it would be identified as it. And for example, the contrast between the head, the white head, and the colored body would be a thing. But he didn't do that. And also, there's a term in ornithology, and I'm fully aware that this term has sexual connotation, but I didn't choose it, so I'm sorry. But a term with ornithologists for describing like the particular silhouette of a bird is called a geese. And the geese is like really when you just know, when looking at a bird passing, you don't know the color exactly, you haven't like seen the details, but you know by the silhouette, oh, it's, I don't know, a blue tit, or it's a pigeon, or it's a vulture, for example. And the geese here is not right. So friends of mine that are like more knowledgeable than me about birds say, yeah, by looking at the landscape also that it's depicted, it's probably a vulture, a turkey vulture, which is like less fancy than a bald eagle, of course. So a turkey vulture. Because of course, the idea is that very tiny body, no neck, really, really large wings, almost as a plank, which is really, really the geese of a vulture, and turkey vulture because we're in the Rocky Mountains. But that is not convincing enough. I'm fully aware of it. And what's interesting, besides like the identification of the bird, is like looking at how the painter represented it, chose to represent it. And he chose to represent it in a very particular setting, which is this one. And this setting shows that the painter was interested in this bird of prey, whether it's a vulture, an eagle, it doesn't matter that much, but it was interested in more than the symbolic meaning. Because if you look at all the landscape depicted, I'm not pointing at the right thing, I think, yeah. He placed the bird of prey in the only spot in the 2 by 3 meters painting. He depicted it in the only spot where it makes sense for the vulture to be, which is in a very particular environment. And if some of you do paragliding, you will probably notice what I'm speaking of. It's a very particular meteorological condition, which is really, really like carefully described by the painter. So we have the golden mountains here, not mountains, but I don't know the word, cliffs. Golden mountainsides here depicted, and a mass of blue colors, mass of dark clouds coming towards it and on it. So the contrast of colors is really striking, and it says that what is happening now is a thermal lift. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a very particular condition where when very cold air meets a mountainside that has been warmed all day by the sun, it creates how do you say, currents of air that turbulence, exactly, that are going upwards like this in circle. And it's really important for what we are looking at, because this is how vultures live, actually, because they don't flap their wings to fly, which is a thing we think birds do this. But no, it's not the case for vultures. They use they are how do you say that, woven to the winds, because since they are scavengers, and being a scavenger is really not an easy thing to be in life, because what you eat does not depend on you. You have to rely on others to kill other animals to be able to eat. So you have to go through kilometers and kilometers each day in the hope of finding something. And so the evolution of vultures created this incredible thing, which is like wings that are really woven to the winds, so it can carry the bird without the bird wasting any, not a bit of energy, just gliding through the wind. So I'm fully, I must stop to speak, but it goes on in the book, and for me it's a particular. And it's also shown this is a thermal lift because the position of the bird, and also how do you say the contrast of colors from the dark blue to light blue to white is a way of creating the sensation of ascension for the bird. So he's really depicting a particular behavior that is really particular to this vulture. The environment, the ecology he's woven to. So for me, it's a good starting point to say, okay, the symbolic interpretation is not enough. Maybe we can say something else. And then I go on with other details in the painting. Thank you so much for your attention.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks a lot to Octavo and to SPY 25 for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to tell something about my work in this great. With these great people. So indeed, I work as a junior curator at the history department of the Rijksmuseum. My background is in critical studies in art and culture and in environmental ethics. So my interest lies in how art both reflects and influences perspectives on the living world. And in particular, I'm interested in the position that we as humans take in relation to other animals and to the living world in general. And what strikes me when I look at the Rijksmuseum collection and also other art collections and the way they have been researched and presented is that it's predominantly human-centered. So the stories that are being told are about humans. Humans as artists, humans as their creators of the objects, and about them as historical figures. And the objects are an expression of, their creation and their stories. But what I think is becoming more and more important is to look at these art collections from a broader ecological perspective. That is realizing that, humans are only one part of the living world, and emphasizing this interconnectedness and interdependency between different forms of life. And the reason why I think it's important to do that at a museum is because our perception of nature is something that's culturally determined. It is a cultural construct, and it changes over time and place. Just think of other worldviews or belief systems that people in other parts of the world have, and to what different ways of interacting with their environments it leads. And how we think about nature influences how we interact with it. So as a museum, we are partly responsible, I feel, for shaping people's perception of their history, of themselves, in relation to their environments. And therefore it matters whose and what stories and histories we are telling. And I think the book that Estelle wrote is very important in this regard, and for this way of thinking and researching the artworks. And I find it a great pleasure to read it, and it offers very interesting methods for this, culture of the living, as she describes so well. And for me, what I try to do in the Rijksmuseum is to be attentive to the living world as well, and to make visitors attentive as well. But what does it mean for a curator and for a museum to do that? Well, today I'd like to share some two small things that I worked on to give you an impression. So 2 years ago, the exhibition Crawly Creatures opened in the Rijksmuseum, and in this exhibition, the changing imagination and perception of small animals in art and science in the early modern period was the central theme. And part of this exhibition was the work of Maria Sibylla Merian, an artist and researcher who lived in the late 17th, early 18th century. She had an exceptional eye for the beauty of insects, which she captured in detailed drawings, as you can see here. And her most important work was made after a trip to Suriname, where she studied the metamorphosis of insects. And in the book that she made, she described over 250 metamorphoses, many of them for the first time, making available numerous new species and a large amount of previously unknown information. And her book also contains descriptions of the circumstances in which she collected the information, revealing that Merian drew on the knowledge of enslaved people and the original inhabitants of Suriname. And of course, Merian was not the only one studying and depicting the living world at the time. So what makes her so special? Well, when you look at her drawings on the left, you see the insects depicted in their habitat, where other people around the same time studied and depicted the natural world in isolation, kind of taken from their natural surroundings, as you can see on the right. But Merian depicted really the ecological relationships between plants and animals. She depicted interwoven life in a way. And in her drawing, we see the different stages of the life of a butterfly and how it transforms from a caterpillar to a butterfly. But we also see the nurse plant on which the butterfly lives and the transformation of the plant itself. We even see little bites in the leaves. So it's a very lively composition. And what's even more special, I think, is that the whole concept of ecosystems, the theory of evolution, and the study of ecology had not yet been born. So Merian studied and depicted interactions between species and life forms almost a century before these concepts were introduced. Before Alexander von Humboldt, for example, developed the concept of ecosystems and described nature as a complex set of as a complex and interconnected system. So her depictions of ecosystems are incredibly progressive and special for her time. And her drawings and descriptions give attention to the behavior and to the symbiosis of these living beings. And I think they also show a certain respect and acknowledgement to their life worlds. Merian is also someone who taught us how to look, I think, and to be attentive to the living world and take other life forms seriously. And recently, this book was acquired by the Rijksmuseum, and it will be on show in our galleries from the 1st of October onwards, so next week. So if you're curious, you can go see it. And for the Crawly Creatures exhibition, we also worked with a contemporary artist. His name is Thomas Saraceno. And he collaborates, as he says, with spiders and spider webs to search for new forms of coexistence between humans and other animals, and a web of life, as he calls it, that we inhabit with them. And he is highly critical of the dominant position we as humans ascribe to ourselves in relation to other living beings. And the artwork on show, it's the one you can see here, it's called Webs of Attention, consisted of real spider webs, which several spiders had woven in an open frame, creating this enormous three-dimensional web sculpture, which was made in his studio and then later transported to the Rijksmuseum. And with this work, Saraceno wants to challenge the anthropocentric worldview, so in which humans are central. And in doing so, he encourages us to move from arachnophobia, so the fear of spiders, to arachnophilia, the love of spiders. And here you see how beautiful, fragile, and yet strong the webs are, and how the threads come together in an infinite network of connections, just like ecosystems. And when one thread moves, you know, it can be felt somewhere else in the web. But the artist Saraceno, he didn't leave it at that. He also challenged the Rijksmuseum to not remove spiders and their webs anymore during the exhibition. And so he asked us to consider them as artists and their webs as artworks, just like the other old masters that we cherish in the museum. So imagine I had to inform our museum director that we will not be removing spider webs anymore and not cleaning the walls during the exhibition. It wasn't an easy task to convince everyone, but eventually we found a way. And so the press also picked up on this kind of crazy thing. So 3 months before the exhibition opening, the cleaners were asked not to remove spiders and the webs anymore from the public spaces of the museum. And then I started going around the museum weekly to spot where webs would appear. And it was a very different way of going around the building that I come to know so well. And so during the exhibition, we put little spotlights on the webs that had appeared. And next to them, the artist put a letter, the open letter for invertebrate rights. And the letter was written on behalf of the spider. And in this letter, the spider thanks the Rijksmuseum that we finally allowed her to exhibit and recognize her webs as artworks after the many anonymous exhibitions that she had, probably in our museum. And I wonder how many visitors noticed it, because if you're not used to looking for these, for the small and for the detailed, it is actually quite difficult to notice. But it was exactly this exercise that Saraceno made us do that I think is very valuable and makes us aware that there's other life all around us. So what he taught us as a museum and me as a curator was not only to be attentive to the beauty and the ingenuity of the living world, but also to adjust our ways of working and broaden our perspective by taking other life forms into account. And here's one last artwork of an old master that appeared in our museum. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. Following these two amazing talks, I just want to do quite a quick talk myself, because I think we want to get to the discussion as soon as possible. And I think it leads on really, really nicely from Julia's talk just now, because my research interest is really around heritage and museums quite broadly. And I look at these through an ecological lens, as was mentioned at the start. And I'm interested mostly in how museums and other cultural spaces like the Rijksmuseum are engaging with contemporary debates around ecology, but also how these ideas have emerged and evolved over a longer time span, so putting ecology in a historical context. But I'm also concerned with where things are heading, basically, and how museums might actually be radically reimagined to address the profound challenges of the climate crisis. First, though, I want to explain this term in my title, the age of ecology. And the image you see here in the background shows the construction of an exhibition from an earlier moment in this age, if we can call it that. The exhibition in question was called Can Man Survive?, shown at the American Museum of Natural History in New York from 1969 to 1971, and it celebrated 100 years since the founding of the museum in 1869. And in many ways, I think we could see this exhibition as a precursor to contemporary ecological exhibitions. It addressed in different ways how human society was exploiting and destroying the natural world, tackling subjects such as population growth, environmental pollution, and the impact of technology on people's relationship to nature. The exhibition, I should say, took 2 years to create and build and cost around $650,000 to make, which is about $5.2 million in today's money, which is quite an astonishing amount for a temporary exhibition. It was also a precursor of today's exhibitions in terms of its scenography. Can Man Survive was an immersive multimedia exhibition with films, soundscapes, objects and 3D displays. Visitors entered via a ramp which led to a tunnel, or what they called a conditioning chamber, and the tunnel then led to a softly lit room with 2 films which covered the delicate balance and interrelationships of nature, simultaneously projected on 10-foot-high screens. So, hope you're picturing this. The next rooms featured the downsides of technology, with increasingly discordant music, asymmetric pieces jutting out from the walls closing in on the visitor, and images of pollution, overcrowding, and decay taking over. And then moving down an exit ramp through the exhibition became quieter, and visitors were confronted at the end with a mirror with the illuminated words, "Can man survive?" and a recorded voice repeating, "It's up to you." So in this and other ways, the exhibition embodied and exemplified a certain attitude towards nature conservation and planetary stewardship, emerging at this time alongside the science of ecology. And indeed, the exhibition coincided with a series of projects and initiatives that sought to highlight the urgency of the ecological crisis. This was, after all, the era of Earth Day in 1970, of the Limits to Growth report, the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment, various publications on the growing environmental crisis, and of the first image of the whole Earth, taken in 1972, the same year that James Lovelock first published his thoughts on the Gaia hypothesis. So a very heady time for ecological agendas and concepts to take hold in the public imagination, this moment in the early 70s. The fact that the American Museum of Natural History celebrated its centenary with an exhibition about the possible destruction of nature should therefore come as little surprise in this context. This was the beginnings of what environmental historian Donald Worster famously called the Age of Ecology, a phrase which, as he put it, expressed a grim hopefulness that ecological science would offer nothing less than a blueprint for planetary survival. So a lot could be said about this exhibition and the context of its production, but I want to highlight three things here. One, the title. While the exhibition may be seen as a precursor of certain ecological ideas, framing this as a question of man's survival clearly does not decenter the human in any meaningful way. This was very much a human story, or even more precisely, a masculine, patriarchal Western story. Two, the method of construction of the exhibition, and this is what first led me to this case study, was seeing these images in the online archives of the museum and thinking it's really hard to imagine a less ecological, less sustainable design or aesthetic for an exhibition. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Three, looking more broadly, the centering of ecological science in this moment, what I've underlined here, tells us something about the place of knowledge and data in societal debates at this time, and the special place given to positivist accounts of the world in debates around ecology then. The same could absolutely not be said about the place of ecology in contemporary cultural discourse. Ecology is now everywhere. And every field, discipline or question recognises the need to orient itself towards the ecological in some way. This has served to radically expand and diversify what counts as ecological knowledge and how this knowledge might be shared or co-created with different communities, human and more than human. And what I want to highlight here is that there are, I think, two big differences between the ecological approach seen with Can Man Survive and how museums today are dealing with ecology. There's probably a lot more than two, but we don't have time, so I'll just say two. So first, as we have already heard, in a small way with the Rijksmuseum, cultural institutions are decentering the human in a myriad of ways. And simultaneously, in the words of Radius in Delft, where Estelle will be speaking tomorrow, bringing together issues of decolonization, inequality and feminism to develop an intersectional approach to ecological issues. This is now really very prominent in what museums and cultural spaces are doing, which is very different from the way Can Man Survive approached it. Second, many museums are now taking the environmental impact of their exhibitions very seriously. And I would say that this eco-operational shift has given rise to a vast number of networks, toolkits, research initiatives and best practice guidelines to try and make the cultural sector more sustainable. So the complete opposite of that really kind of big scaffolding metal structure that you saw with Can Man Survive. Telling stories about the environmental crisis is no longer enough. Today, museums must enact their ecological rhetoric. So where might things actually go from here? So while I welcome both of these developments, I also think we need to acknowledge the limitations of the museum as a tool to pursue a more ecological society. We are talking, after all, about spaces and institutions often founded on colonial, patriarchal, extractivist approaches to the world. Is it really enough just to make exhibitions more sustainable or to tell stories in new ways? And the image you see here, which I'm going to end on, is from a short animation by Design Earth, who are a kind of architectural design agency based in the States. And the animation shows one of the taxidermy elephants on display at the American Museum of Natural History coming to life and charging through the streets of New York to demand climate action before returning to the museum and dismantling the building completely, and finally finding some peace in its ruins. So obviously a very fantastical idea, but also one that gets to the heart of the profound challenge that ecological thinking should pose to the status quo, and especially to those institutions and structures that have upheld narratives of progress, growth, and human exceptionalism for so long. That's where I'm ending. Over to the discussion. That was good timing.
We will now have a panel discussion with our three lovely speakers. Thank you all for your wonderful presentations and lectures. I wanted to start by pointing out that I think we have a very unique group of people here tonight, and their work intersects in really interesting ways. We have Estelle, an environmental art historian who brings together art and art history and ecology in her work, as we saw. And Julia, who as a curator brings exactly this type of ideas into practice by curating these exhibitions that you've also talked about tonight. And Colin, you researched the effect and significance of this type of exhibition as an intervention in the broader context of museum and heritage studies. So I think your work intersects also across the crucial registers of theory and practice. And all of you approach this in different ways within your work, so I'm very curious to hear more about this. And I'm also sure that you are curious to hear more from each other. So let me start by asking Estelle a question. By introducing the idea of the ecological crisis, of a crisis as sensitivity to the living world, you bring art and art history into the realm of ecology. And as an example also of Bierstadt showed different ways of interpreting the painting lead to very different ways of seeing the significance of the living entities that are depicted. Like it can be like the symbolism and then it ends there, or you see the bird as a bird, and you actually, by refusing to interpret it, you open up the painting and see so much more about what is happening there. My question is, well, you've talked about why it is crucial to make this shift. My question is, do you think art specifically has a role to play in increasing our sensitivity? And I also want to pose this question to all of you, because all of your practices, I think, relate to this.
Okay. So I think there are many ways of increasing our sensitivity. I think the problem of increasing sensitivity is creating relationships with, and in this case, the living world. So you can do this by gardening, farming, I don't know, learning about naturalist practices. You can do it by, I don't think there is a privilege, maybe I shouldn't say that here, but I don't think there is a privilege for art, to art, as to, it's not a privileged way of creating sensitivity. It's a way among others, but the interesting thing is that for some strange reason, we've considered in our culture that art is kind of important and valued as, I don't know, where our collective values are embodied. And it's less the case in gardening, for example. So I think we have a leverage here that is perhaps not present in other practices. And also, it's probably also an interesting field to be working on because it embodies really like the figure of culture, which has been so much separated from nature. And it's as if, okay, we can be interested in nature for itself when we're gardening, when we're hiking, when we're like outside, but when we are looking at nature in a cultural setting or in artworks, then for it to be cultural, it should talk about us. And I think as if culture was the place, was naturally the place, actually I'm like doing too much wordplay here, but like was supposed to be the place where we discuss only about humans, which is not the case in many cultures. Because, for example, I'm speaking about Canada a lot tonight. I don't know why, but I spent quite a lot of time there. And, for example, if you look at Inuit culture, then, for example, it's not the case at all. That culture is the place where we should just talk about ourselves and social relationships and human stories of love and politics. And so it's really a Western way of thinking, to think that, it's because I hear that a lot, that it's normal that in cultural objects, like nature's speaking about us, because it's supposed to be this way. It's supposed to be this area of our lives where we're like reflecting on ourselves. But I think the idea is like, could culture be also, or art, a place where we're reflecting on ourselves, but not only as humans, but as ways of being alive among other ways of being alive. That's the thing. So I'm not saying we should not talk about humans, but talking about humans could be done in many other ways, and like considering us as living beings, as part of the living world, could also be a thing that could be done in art. So, yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So art is not essentially privileged, but given the role that we give it in our culture, it has a privileged spot in our society.
Yeah.
Can I open up the question to Julia or Colin, who would like to respond?
Yeah, just to add to Estelle, because I think she's already said a lot about it, but for me, what I would think that is valuable in like bringing the landscape, for example, in landscape paintings alive and in museums and like cultural institutions, is that it hasn't really been about them for the sake of them up till now. So just by taking them from this like static background into actually an actor or something that we are taking seriously and that we can relate to, and that has a history of its own, and that has a different time frame and a different life world, basically. Just by taking it serious and putting it up front, it can change something, I think, in the way that people have been looking at these paintings. So I would say just by, adding stories to what is visible and what we talk about is also adding value to the stories, basically. And I'm curious what Colin has to say about this, because he just said that adding new stories might not be enough or radical enough. So I would love to hear your opinion.
Well, perhaps I should answer the question. I think I should start the answer by saying that I am like wildly insensitive to nature and the natural world. It's a running joke amongst my friends that I teach and research on ecology, and am really kind of allergic to the natural world. I've grown up in cities. I want to live in cities. Urban environments are my place. And art is also my place, and I really enjoy the mediation that art provides that allows a different interpretation or a different encounter with that thing that I feel somehow alienated from. But I also increasingly recognize that alienation is an enormous problem. That's kind of the problem that interests me, the fact that I feel so alienated from this thing. And what art has given me, more than, I think it's a form of sensitivity, but it's just a deep awareness and knowledge and understanding of the fact that no matter how separate I might want to be, or have been brought up to be by living in an urban environment, I am fully entangled from and inseparable from those natural environments and the ecologies that are out there in the world. And it's that sensitivity to the impossibility of separating myself from that really interests me, and that I have found art really, really valuable for. And in terms of storytelling, I think we do need more than stories, but I will highlight one piece of art. It's more literature that has really profoundly changed my relationship to the natural world, and that's The Overstory by Richard Powers. It just I don't know, it just did something to my brain that I'd never encountered in a text before. And it just, so it does happen. There are real concrete examples of how it can open your horizons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No matter how much you resist it. Yeah. So you're speaking of the alienation from nature. Perhaps this is one inheritance from modernity, just like what you were talking about, how we approach art as that which reflects ourselves back to us. Your work is about trying to escape this. Can you tell us a bit more about what it takes to escape this, to come loose from this, and does it take research, practice, or do you know this?
Oh my God, what does it take? Good question. How can I answer this question? It's not most of my work, but my research starts always with negative navigation. I know where I don't want to end up. I know where I don't want to go. I don't want to crash in the reefs. I don't want to crash in the lighthouse. But it's not very clear where I'm going. So the thing is trying to identify those, how do you say that, repellent cultural figures that have been, it's not they're repellent per se, it's just that they have had the monopoly of interpreting nature, and they also contributed to the fact of us seeing nature as something, the living world as something remote from us, distant from us, inferior from us, kind of inanimate because deprived of any intentionality, interiority, being just matter subjected to stimulus reflex somehow, and operating in a mechanistic way. And this view, this modern view of nature that has been analyzed by many, many researchers, from philosophy to anthropology, is what enabled. It's not what created the ecological crisis we're in, of course, because you have to be an idealist to think that it works like this. But this view of nature enabled the careless exploitation of nature that caused the extractivist careless exploitation. Because if it's just inanimate matter subjected to mechanical processes and there's nothing more to it, then, just go. So the thing is to identify, cultural reflexes we have when looking at nature, and art history, sadly, is kind of a good field to do this. It's really interesting. I encourage you to do this, to look, because what I'm interested in is, because no one reads art history. I'm fully aware of this. But there are some things, what I'm interested about is the kind of common sense that somehow traveled from art history to like our cultural mindset, which is mainly what we read, for example, on a museum website, like the short description of paintings that are added. It's kind of the main views we have about art in a way, and sometimes it's good. I'm not like, but it's But it's kind of for me, it's kind of the cultural symptoms of the figures of nature we used to work with. And so I'm asking myself, okay, this is good. This is a set of tools, but what is missing? I mean, which tools are not doing justice to the complexity of what is a living being? And then I'm like really, really taking time to answer these questions, but and then I look at paintings, and each painting is kind of an invented set of tools that I couldn't imagine by myself. It's really like the paintings and the painters that are like, oh, if you want like to consider the living world in another way, then you could change your pictorial technique, or you could change the composition, or you could show how the form of an animal or a plant actually is not just an appearance, like an arbitrary appearance, but like tells the story of this animal and this plant, and tells how it's living. So it's kind of a very arduous work, because it's like an example, a counter-cultural example at a time, from painting to painting. And every time I find new paintings, it's kind of like new answers, new figures. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Thank you. Julia, you, of course, work in this field where you translate this theory, art history, to the exhibition. And I was wondering, like we saw it with the spider webs in the museum, you said you weren't sure if people saw them. And I think it's because when we enter a museum, we have a certain way of engaging with the space. You look at the paintings, you look at the sculptures, and you enjoy them, maybe, and you move to the next room. And I think in your work you're trying to change that. You're trying to change the relation that we have to the museum as maybe the visual and the physical experience. You also, I think, reflect on this, what this type of intervention can, what the maybe radical consequences can be of this. So I want to ask you both. I want to ask you, what are your considerations around this? How do you put these ideas into practice? Maybe something, the exhibition you're working on now, or the ones you've done in the past. And for you, what can the radical consequences of this be?
Okay. So I think there's a difference between working with a contemporary artist or a living artist who really kind of is able to push these boundaries, as Saraceno did in our museum. But then again, the Rijksmuseum is not really known for its contemporary artworks, or like, you know, it's very different from a modern and contemporary art museum. Our collection is mostly historical and from a retrospective. Indeed, in the Crawly Creatures exhibition, it was very, it had a strong appearance. This kind of subversive act of letting the spiders roam around. But indeed, I'm working now on an exhibition that is going to be there in 3 years. So we are really in a preliminary stage about the Dutch landscape and the changes in it. And for this exhibition, we are, or I'm looking way more to like the historical imaginations and depictions of the Dutch landscape. And it's a very different story because, of course, we are looking with the eyes of today and the concerns of today to historical objects that are made in a very different time with very different reality around these subjects. But you know, indeed, as you also showed, there's so much thinking and theory going on around these subjects. So it is actually interesting for me to try to translate it and to put different lenses on the paintings and the objects that we know well. And for example, you know, when diving into the historical landscape and how it developed, of course, in the Netherlands, the presence of humans was always there and is very present. But, you know, up until the middle of the 19th century, this interaction between humans and their environments and their agriculture and their ways of like influencing the natural environment actually didn't mean that it was depriving nature from like the health. It actually meant that the natural world, the living world, had the highest, we say like natuurwaarde, like the highest, the highest biodiversity, basically. Yeah. So when looking with this information at those historical objects and those historical paintings, it actually kind of shows it puts a very different light of what we are looking at. That are things that I'm working on right now, and I try to do, and it's a constant back and forth, I would say, between different fields of knowledge. Trying to look with different eyes. Sometimes it's not possible with your own eyes. You really need like other people's eyes to see new things. And then, adding these layers to what we are seeing, and hopefully also, you know, make visitors aware of these very different realities that can also be attached to this object that is also a product of its time. Yeah.
Shall I answer briefly?
Yes, please.
So I always find it funny that now I get like the radical question because I'm like the least radical person you could ever imagine. But I also think it's important to, well, the way I think about this is museums at some point 500 years ago, some people, mostly men of a certain category, had the idea of collecting stuff, making museums, building these things. They were pretty radical ideas at the time, pretty weird, crazy people doing this stuff. And so my interest now is really in the weird, crazy edges of the museum world and what might be emerging there to completely transform these cultural institutions. The problem is that the problem of time. We don't have 500 years to solve the crisis that we're in. So we kind of need to amplify, magnify those radical, crazy, weird things as much as possible to see if we can undo what were really radical ideas of capitalism, modernity, industrialization. Those are radical transformations of the planet.
Yeah.
Those are the most radical things that have ever happened to the Earth. So we need to be radical in a different way.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense. I want to open up the questions to the room. You will get a microphone if you have a question. There's one over there.
Following up to your radicalness, do you think climate change right now, like for instance the floods in West Europe, wherever they are, I'm not exactly sure, but do you think that could be part of the radicalness and helping us like finally see what we should be doing all along? In answer to this, I bet. Thank you.
You're the radical character.
Yeah, God, where to begin with that? I feel like I would rather that it becomes a kind of therapy session with a question like that, because my feeling is we're in a struggle. It's a genuine struggle that is occurring, and it's a struggle that is happening in multiple contexts around the world. It's a very material struggle for survival, but it's also a struggle against political and economic systems that are perpetuating that problem. And so you have to be fighting this crisis on multiple fronts simultaneously. And the fact that there's some floods happening currently in an area of Europe, there will be so many climate-related disasters unfolding right now around the planet. Keeping track of that, keeping that in your brain is not possible, is not healthy. So we have to just form collaborations and multiple networks to try to grapple with that and confront it. Art is one of those nodes in that network, but make sure you connect with others.
Yeah, thank you all for your beautiful presentations and very interesting things you were telling. I was wondering, like, just basic question, like, what is the role of the rural in this? As if there's a place where people always, where there's like a co-living with the living world and the human world, or like one living world is the rural. What role does rural art, for example, in the coming exhibition in the Rijksmuseum, could that have, or for how to learn to look at nature from a rural perspective? So, yeah, wondering.
Yeah, it's a very good question, because in the mostly the paintings of the rural landscape are made by painters who weren't living there, right? They would go there, paint, and come back to their cities, homes, and also idealize it in a way, or like, you know, like these depictions are often not made by the people living there because they had they didn't have the they couldn't be a painter often in those areas. So indeed, for this upcoming exhibition, we are trying to look at all the parts of the Netherlands and what was happening there. But we are in this stage where we are now. We are mostly focusing on the collection that we have and what we can like get out of it for now. So it's very much in development, I would say, and it hasn't really crystallized out, I must say, like this specific aspect. Yeah.
Can I answer a bit? Because I'm very interested in question, because I had the same thought as you. That's why last year I passed an agricultural vocational diploma, because I was like, yeah, I should, if I'm speaking about creating relationships so much with the living world, I should be able to know what it is from a very practical and also not idealized point of view. And I think the problem is that, I don't know, I'm talking just about me. I had fully a guilt of being kind of an urban person, kind of estranged from the countryside, and it wasn't true anymore because I lived there for quite a long time. And it was like I felt that I was coming back to some kind of truth. That's how I started my agricultural vocational diploma. And then I was fully mistaken, of course, because agricultural, I don't know how it's in the Netherlands, but in France, how farming is taught is really, really, really depressing, because they're not aware at all that, we're in an ecological crisis. I don't know how you say, ecological, organic farming is not really, it's just a chapter among many other chapters. And animals are really, and plants are really talked about as stock that you have to manage in a rational way, but it could be paper, it would be really the same thing. So it was really interesting for me to see, because it's kind of a modernity figure of nature, and the way it was. So this was in the books, of course, and then I had my internship in the farm, and it was totally different, of course, and I loved it. But it's also, I think, we have like from an urban, like cultural perspective. It's also what's interesting, I think, within the rural context, is to preserve the ambiguity of it. It's not a golden place where just because we are living among plants and animals, like there is a truly beautiful and complex ambiguity in farming, because, I mean, the production relationship is like full of contradictions and hard things to combine. And I think, but it's what I was interested in, like, also. But, I mean, so I'm not sure that I can say, like, oh, like the truth of, like, I don't know, rich relationships is to be found, like, in countryside, and it's just that we've been estranged from it. I think there are other set of problems in the rural countryside, and it's another story of how we considered animals and plants than maybe the one I've been telling here, for example. But it's not a solvent for me. It's just adding a layer of complexity on top of other layers. Yeah, so yeah, I would say that.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. There in the back.
Thank you. I'll try to frame my question. I think in Estelle's imagination of how Albert must have been sitting in the landscape and imagining this scene, and also in Julia's idea of how Maria must have been observing these insects in the ecological habitat, wherever they were. Do you think they heard stories from around them that helped them to imagine this scene in this way? And also then it kind of goes back to Colin around the radical potential of stories to throw new imaginaries of nature. So in a sense that where do you position the art historian? In the studio or in the landscape with the artist?
About Miriam, I will give a short, try to give a short answer, because we know that she went to Suriname to study these insects, and that she did it with the help of local people and enslaved people. So she very much leaned on stories and other people's knowledges of their interactions, and she described them as well in her book. So she made the drawings, and then next to it there's the description of the species and of the interaction of the species. So yeah, in her case, she was very much an observer in the environment itself. But she took her notes and drawings also back to Amsterdam and finished this book 4 years after she came back. So she used her drawings to finish the work. Yeah.
Yeah, I've integrated Mike. It's hard to answer your question because, okay, I'm going to not like fully go in a loop, but I was, for some time I thought that, because we say, okay, I can trust this painter really depicts nature in a significant way because he spent time observing it outside. But I'm like, yeah, but how do you observe? I mean, to observe it, because for example, I go outside, I look at what is around me. Do I observe nature? Even if I'm like depicting it, I mean, what do I see? What do I pay attention to? There are many things. If I look at this tree outside, seeing is always a matter of selecting and omitting things. So the question is not so much observing, but what is your eye valuing unconsciously or consciously, and what do you decide that is worth representing? So I think that when the painter is outside observing nature, it's already the result of previous layers of books, stories, encounters with people that at a certain point in time, like, aggregate, and then you see the tree and you're like, oh my God, I could like fully see the biography of the tree and the struggles he went through, for example. But it's not just, I had this problem, I have an existential problem with like the verb observing, because I'm like, yeah, but like we're not saying anything when we're saying observing. It's like just the first layer, and we have like to, because the problem is how, because I'm interested in this, because my problem is how can we observe better? And I fully know that when I'm in the forest, for example, sometimes it doesn't happen. I'm really, really like opening my eyes really wide everywhere, but like I don't see something. I just see like, I don't know, forms, but they're kind of meaningless, and I see beauty, but it's kind of like floating in the air. I don't know if you know what I mean. But it's also why I think, coming back to the question of Jacinta, like why art is relevant for like creating sensitivity, is because in painting there has been like another eye before you that has infused the painting with like a system of accent and emphasis and meaningfulness. So when you see the vulture in the painting, suddenly it's like, I don't know, all coming together and kind of charged. And maybe if I see it outside, if I didn't see this painting or like read things about vultures, it's just passing and nothing is happening, even if I'm like observing it. So I think, though, yeah, it's like the training of the eye, as you said, is not just, when seeing is like not a proper verb. I should totally like change the title of this book now when I'm thinking about it. It's like, yeah, seeing is like the result of many, many more actions and relationships, and that amounts to the possibility of, at one point in life, seeing really something. Yeah.
Thank you so much, all of you. I will end on this note. Please have a drink over there, buy a book over there if you want. And please thank all of our speakers with me. Yeah, the end.